Welcome to Smart Cities Week 2015. I'm Carol Stimmel, and we're in the studio right now with Philip Bane, who's the Executive Director of the Smart Cities Council. First of all, we're well into day one right now, but I wanted to ask a few questions about how we got here. First of all, why Washington?
Actually, the question is, why Washington in September?
Yes.
So, for those of us who live here, which I do, I was born in this city, is that September is one of the most beautiful times of year. So you don't want to invite people to your home without being able to put on a great reception. And this time of year is great for that. So besides that, obviously, it's many of us still consider it the capital of the free world. And whether you like it or not, there's a lot of business that's done here. A lot of decisions are made here. And so it's an easy place for people to come. I mean, I've lived in this city for a long time, and when you tell people that you're in Washington, D.C., they always put it on the same level as they would Broadway or LA or Wall Street or something like that. So it is a place where decisions are made about the world, about this country, and it's a great opportunity. In our particular case, we focused on local cities. So our first year at Smart Cities Week was to find people who lived within 500 miles and to have them come here, because right now the U.S. economy is probably, if not the top, close to the top economy in the world. So if I'm a vendor from China, India, Brazil, Germany, this is a great place to come, because this is where decisions are made, this is where budgets are spent, and so there's a great opportunity to influence the U.S. market. A lot of people think, I'm not sure that I totally agree, that the U.S. market is behind in terms of adoption of smart technologies. We certainly don't have the same number of apps that you have in some other places like Europe. We certainly haven't provided some of the government services that are provided in Europe or the Gulf Coast countries. There are some services that are provided in China and India that we don't provide here. So there's great opportunity for people that are looking for to improve both their top line and our bottom line in the United States with attendance at this particular conference. So more than anything, I think it's the decision making and the economy here that makes this a really great place to come.
You said some say we're behind in terms of smart cities technologies. One of the things I've observed so far at Smart Cities Week is how there's a lot of really healthy discussion that goes way beyond the application of technology, smart technologies. There's lots of discussion about integration. There's discussion about bringing in communities, the governance and politics, and really a good focus on process and how can we help cities make, find a return on investment in the short term, but help them with a long-term strategy. So that's not just a U.S. issue, but that's a global issue as well.
We're very sensitive to the fact that people have to decide what technologies or processes or changes they want to make in their own backyard. So I'm not here to tell somebody who's living in Beijing or Delhi or Istanbul what they need to make their city smarter. That's their decision.
Right.
But what is unique about these technologies is they have the ability to integrate prior technologies, even integrate paper records, and at the same time provide a pathway to future uses like apps, mobile apps, drones, things like this. So you have this unique confluence with smart technologies, which are basically anything that works with a synchronous two-way communication and something that's digital. Those are the two key aspects of what we call a smarter technology. But you have a confluence or ability to integrate the past with the future. And while that sounds great to a CTO or a CIO, for a citizen the important thing is lowering the cost of the delivery of these services and delivering more services. So it's everything, you've seen transportation apps, mobile apps, health apps, policing apps. You've heard talks here about how people can integrate data from emergency rooms with police reports so they understand where there are drug overdoses. Maybe there's a drug sale going on in a particular community. I don't think most of us, lay people, understand how the data can actually improve our lives. And they're more worried about, the privacy of their data or data being misused, and so they don't get a chance to see really the beneficial uses. And that's where something like Smart Cities Week is really intended to do, is to show that there are a lot of well-intentioned people, smart people, There are a lot of applications or deployment of technology that's been around. We're not talking about cutting edge technology that you're going to be the first city that uses it. We're talking about things that have been around for 10, 15 years. They were deployed in smart grid, they've been deployed in defense. I mean, if you ever want to take that term, sword into plowshares, that's what smart cities does.
Right.
More than anything else, it's about using these future technologies that we used for war to reduce suffering.
You brought up the idea of how many different kinds of people are engaged and how everybody's really a stakeholder in smart cities. If you have something to bring to the table, you really can. And that's one of the things I've noticed here at this event at Smart Cities Week is that I've talked to a guy that started in a garage with an idea he couldn't get around. So he's built a formidable company out of that. But I'm also talking to traditional infrastructure companies that have been around many, many decades who are also adapting their business, or traditional companies in network who are moving up the stack to applications. So it's quite fascinating how everybody can come to the table. How do we start looking at innovation differently when it comes to smart cities? How do we continue to drive that kind of innovation and bring the right people to the table?
That's really sort of a loaded question.
Yeah.
Because especially in the United States, we appreciate the startup culture, we appreciate entrepreneurialism, we appreciate innovation. We've built a whole culture around it. A lot of people have made a lot of money, a lot of people have done a lot of good. For cities, it's particularly complex because if I'm a city decision maker, I'm there not only to serve my citizens, but also protect them.
Yes.
So a classic place, I mean, you can think of policing and how you now, if you're a city mayor, you go, well, maybe I need body cams, because that's taking the technology and bringing it in a way that protects my citizens, and it makes my police officers accountable. But at the same time, the problem you have with data is how open is the data? How much data, of yours and mine are we going to share with a city to make it protect us, okay? So you have this culture of innovation and entrepreneurship, but at the city end, you have a responsibility to protect people. And so data can be misused, we all know that. But also, I have a limited budget in a city. So I'm not as eager to say, oh, you're a startup, you started in the garage, you've been around for 3 years, where's your first city pilot? Well, we don't, and the entrepreneur says, I'm sorry, I don't have a city pilot. We did some kind of pilot over here or did this. And then the other question the city asks is, do you have staying power? So to a certain extent, I think, if you want to say that the analogies for smart cities technology trends, on one hand you have the Amazon analogy where they totally discombobulated bricks and mortar bookstores to the point where they put them out of business.
Right.
Then the other analogy you have is what happens with banks. At first you had a couple of internet payment systems. I took an internet payment company public with a bunch of technologist friends. But what happened? The banks caught up, right? The banks said, oh, you got to be federally regulated,
right.
You got to be state regulated, you got to protect people and their money, right? So what the banks started to do was integrate all this new technology and bring it on. So, now you go to a regular big bank and do your online banking and use your app and all this kind of stuff. It's all modern cutting edge technology, but it's offered by names that have been around for 300 years. So I think that's what's going to happen in the city space. And what's unique about Smart Cities Week is you see this confluence of what I would call more mainstream companies, infrastructure companies, companies that 20 years ago would have laid asphalt and concrete and rebar. And now what they're doing is they're still laying the concrete, asphalt, and rebar, but they're putting sensors in them. And they're putting in broadband, cable with it. So that's the difference. So in some senses, I think what cities can rely on is this metaphor of what the banks did with new technologies. They used their strengths and they incorporated the new technologies.
Well, the common denominator here is data. Right?
Exactly.
So, if you are a traditional infrastructure company and you're starting to put sensors, if you're going to build a new building, it has to be able to sense and actuate at some level now. That's just the way it's going to be. But you raised a really good point about tolerance for data collection, data usage, and it's even earlier when we started to move into this world with smart meters, smart meter deployments, smart grid deployments. Okay, the difference between what we could do in New York or California or the various markets we have in the United States, North America, versus what happened in Amsterdam, because there's different governance, and in the UK projects got slowed down because of data concerns. So as we start looking at the international prospects for smart cities and how we use and acquire data, are we just going to be able to pick up some of the technology applications we have here and just go overseas with them, or how is that going to work?
That's a really good question, and I've talked to several of our delegates from other countries, particularly China, where what you have to recognize is that technology generally is built around what we call an architecture. Hardware, software, communications, data structures. None of that comes from any particular country. The advantage you have today with modern technology is that it's ubiquitous. What is personal is the data. So I can take an architecture from Germany, from Sweden, from the United States. I can take a data schema, which is how do I arrange the data. And at no time do I ever have to deal with the underlying data. So if I'm a company that builds an app, or I have a data integration platform, or I have a database, that data integration platform, that app can be just as simply in China or Japan or India or the United States without ever worrying about the underlying data.
Right.
So if I'm a technology vendor, it's a great place to be. It's a great market. And then if I'm a Chinese city and I'm worried about an American technology provider giving me that data architecture, I don't even have to deal with that. Because an American technology company can partner with a Chinese technology company, and they could say, no, we'll just keep the data over here in this Alibaba's cloud, as opposed to the Amazon cloud or whatever else. So the nice thing about smarter technologies is that they're ubiquitous, and you don't have to make these by choosing a technology, you don't have to make the sort of damning choices about exposing the data. You can totally protect the data with the technology. So there's some great opportunities there.
And if what I hear you talking about is now a conversation I've had a few times, just in the few hours I've been speaking with people here, it's about goals, right? So what are the goals? There's no real cookie cutter city. Cities have different demographics, different geographies, different stressors throughout the world. So, but what I hear you saying is we can take the technologies that are now time-tested, standard, ubiquitous, and we can learn to apply them in a coherent, contextually appropriate way for whatever city we want to work in, no matter where it is in the world.
You said it better than I did, so you were obviously listening.
I have lots of practice.
Yeah, right, exactly.
That's great, and that's really consistent with what I believe we need to see. And I'm wondering, as part of the Smart Cities Council, this very successful event in Washington, D.C., what is your vision for growing the council, not just in North America, but across the globe? What do you want to see happen?
So it's funny, because most of our discussion has been about technology.
Yeah.
But for the Smart Cities Council to grow, and for the concept of making cities smarter, it's about people. So you can't do business globally unless you build relationships. So for instance, Smart Cities Council, instead of dropping itself into India, we found a partner, Smart Cities Council, and formed Smart Cities Council India. We're in the process of doing that in Europe, in the Middle East, in China, because we believe that it is people who live in Beijing, in Delhi, in Istanbul, or Berlin who have to make the decisions about how they want to apply this technology. So ultimately, for the smart city wave, for making our cities smarter, with the goal of livability, workability, and sustainability, it's about people.
Right.
And that's the nice thing about it. That's the thing that always comes back to me, because everybody expects the first words out of my mouth are to explain the technology.
Right.
And they aren't. The first words out of my mouth are, as Jesse said today when we started, you're really smart because you're here today and you're willing to listen and you're willing to learn. So for us, it's ultimately about the people involved.
Right. Great message. I appreciate the reminder that this really is truly swords into plowshares. I've seen that in a lot of ways with microgrid technology and sensor technology, and being able to apply it to everyday human problems for urban dwellers, where over 50% of the world is going to be living in urban environments in the next few decades anyway. So this is really exciting. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with Philip Bane today in the studio at Smart Cities Week in Washington. Thanks a lot for spending a few minutes with me.